In the bustling city of Lagos, John and Grace's paths first crossed in the most ordinary way. They were both running errands in Balogun Market, John looking for spare parts for his small generator business, and Grace shopping for fabric for her aunt's upcoming wedding. A light drizzle began, and both sought shelter under the same shop canopy. John was the first to speak. "Rain doesn't give notice, does it?" he said, flashing a warm smile. Grace chuckled. "It sure doesn't. Good thing it's just a drizzle." They struck up a conversation, exchanging small jokes and stories while waiting for the rain to stop. A week later, John called Grace. He had managed to convince her to give him her number as they parted. From that day, their friendship blossomed. John was hard-working and kind-hearted, and Grace admired his determination. Grace worked as a schoolteacher, and she loved how John always listened attentively whenever she talked about her students. Over the months, their relationship deepened. John proposed a year later during a quiet dinner at a local restaurant. Grace, teary-eyed but smiling, said yes. The wedding was a small but joyful event held in Grace's family compound in Surulere. Friends, family, and neighbors danced late into the night, celebrating the union of two souls deeply in love. Everyone spoke about how perfect John and Grace were for each other. Not long after the wedding, Grace began to feel different. She was often tired and noticed she couldn't keep her food down. One Sunday morning, as she and John prepared to go to church, Grace fainted. John panicked and rushed her to the nearest clinic. There, the doctor smiled after a few tests and said, "Congratulations. You're going to be parents." John jumped to his feet in excitement, and Grace held her stomach, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This is a blessing," she whispered. From that moment, John became even more protective of Grace. He attended every prenatal checkup with her, bought her favorite snacks, and even helped her tie her shoes when her belly grew too big for her to bend down. Grace gave birth to a beautiful baby girl on a warm August afternoon. They named her Sarah. Sarah was a happy baby, always giggling and reaching for her parents. John and Grace were determined to give her the best life possible. But when Sarah turned 5, strange things began to happen. One night, she woke up screaming, tears streaming down her face. "Mummy! Daddy!" she cried, clinging to Grace. "What's wrong, my dear?" Grace asked gently, stroking her hair. Sarah pointed to the corner of the room, trembling. "There's someone there," she whispered. Grace and John looked but saw nothing. "It's just a bad dream," John said, picking Sarah up and rocking her to sleep. But the nightmares didn't stop. The nightmares grew worse over time. Almost every night, Sarah would wake up screaming, sweating, and shaking. She kept pointing to the same corner of the room, saying, "He's there, Mummy. He's watching." Grace and John were worried, but they told themselves it was just a phase. "It's probably because she's been watching too many cartoons," John said one evening as they sat in the living room. Grace nodded hesitantly. "Maybe. Or perhaps something scared her at school." The next day, Grace spoke to Sarah's teacher, Mrs. Helen, but the teacher assured her that Sarah was doing fine in class. "She's a little quiet, but she plays well with the other kids," Mrs. Helen said. Still, the nightmares didn't stop. Sarah started refusing to sleep in her room, crying every time Grace tried to leave her alone. "Please, Mummy, don't go," she would beg. Grace eventually gave in and let Sarah sleep in their bed. But even there, the little girl would wake up screaming. One night, John decided to sleep in Sarah's room. "Let's prove to her there's nothing to be afraid of," he said confidently. He laid out a mattress on the floor while Sarah slept in her bed. At around 2 a.m., John heard a soft sound. It was like someone whispering, but the words were faint and unclear. He sat up, his heart pounding. "Grace," he called, thinking she had come to check on them. But the room was empty except for him and Sarah. Then, Sarah stirred in her sleep, mumbling something. "He's here," she whispered, still asleep. John felt a chill run down his spine. He shook her gently to wake her, but she started screaming again. "Daddy, don't let him take me," she cried, clutching him tightly. For the first time, John felt real fear. He didn't know what to do. The next morning, John and Grace sat down together to talk. "This isn't normal," Grace said, her voice trembling. "We've tried everything. Prayers, staying in her room, talking to her. But it's not going away." John nodded. "Maybe we should speak to someone who knows about these things. An elder or even a counselor." They decided to visit Grace's grandmother, Mama Rebecca, who lived in a quiet village outside Lagos. Mama Rebecca was known for her wisdom and deep understanding of traditional beliefs. When they explained everything to her, Mama Rebecca listened carefully, her face serious. "Children see things that adults cannot," she said finally. "If Sarah is saying someone is in that room, you must not ignore it." Grace shivered. "But what can we do?" she asked. Mama Rebecca looked at Sarah, who was playing quietly nearby. "I will come to your house. There are ways to protect a child from whatever is troubling her. But you must promise me one thing. You will believe her, no matter what she says." That evening, Mama Rebecca came to the house. She brought with her a small pouch filled with herbs and some items wrapped in cloth. She walked around Sarah's room, muttering prayers under her breath. She placed the herbs in the corners of the room and told John and Grace to burn them later. Then she sat down with Sarah and asked her to describe what she had been seeing. "He's tall," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He wears black clothes, and his eyes are red. He stands in the corner and doesn't say anything. He just looks at me." Mama Rebecca nodded as if this was exactly what she had expected. "He's a spirit, but not a kind one. He has been drawn to Sarah for a reason. We must find out why." John and Grace exchanged nervous glances. "What do you mean?" John asked. Mama Rebecca's face was grave. "Spirits like him are often tied to something in the house or the family. We need to look deeper." Mama Rebecca instructed John and Grace to stay close as she examined the house. She moved from room to room, carrying a small clay bowl with burning herbs, muttering prayers as the smoke filled the air. Sarah clung tightly to Grace, her small hands trembling. When Mama Rebecca entered the living room, she paused. Her eyes scanned the walls, the furniture, and the floor, as if searching for something invisible. She knelt near the corner where an old wooden chest sat. It was a family heirloom that John had inherited from his late uncle. "What is in here?" Mama Rebecca asked, pointing to the chest. John scratched his head. "It's just some old belongings. Papers, books, nothing important." Mama Rebecca's expression darkened. "Bring it here. We need to open it." John hesitated but obeyed. He placed the chest in the center of the room and unlocked it. Inside were dusty books, faded photographs, and other keepsakes. But as Mama Rebecca dug through the contents, she pulled out a small wooden carving, a figure of a man with red eyes and a long cloak. Grace gasped. "That looks just like what Sarah described." Mama Rebecca held the carving carefully, her face stern. "This is no ordinary figure. It carries a spirit bound to it. Your uncle must have brought this into the house without knowing its history. It's been here, unnoticed, until now. The spirit's connection to Sarah. But why is it troubling Sarah?" Grace asked, her voice shaking. "She's just a child." Mama Rebecca placed the carving on the floor and sat down, motioning for John and Grace to do the same. Children are pure, untouched by the burdens of adulthood. Spirits like this one are drawn to that innocence. It sees Sarah as an easy target to latch onto. John clenched his fists. "How do we stop it? How do we protect her?" Mama Rebecca nodded. "We will destroy this carving, but it must be done carefully. If we don't follow the proper steps, the spirit could linger or even become angrier. I will guide you through the process." That evening, as the sun set, Mama Rebecca prepared for the ritual. She asked John and Grace to gather a few items, a white cloth, salt, and a small bowl of water. She set up a space outside in the backyard, away from the house. Sarah stayed close to Grace, watching silently as Mama Rebecca wrapped the carving in the white cloth and sprinkled it with salt. She explained that the salt would purify and weaken the spirit. "We will burn it," Mama Rebecca said, "and as it burns, We will say a prayer to release the spirit back to where it came from. John lit the fire while Grace held Sarah tightly. As the flames engulfed the wrapped carving, the air grew heavy. A loud crack came from the fire, and Sarah whimpered. "It's okay, my child," Mama Rebecca said soothingly. "It's leaving now." Once the fire died down, Mama Rebecca sprinkled the ashes with water and buried them in a small hole at the edge of the yard. She then returned to Sarah's room, placing a small charm above her bed for protection. "You must keep this charm here," she told John and Grace, "and never bring unknown items into the house without understanding their history." That night, Sarah slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Grace stayed by her side, watching her daughter's calm, steady breathing. John, too, felt a wave of relief wash over him. But as they prepared to move on from the ordeal, something unexpected happened. The days that followed were peaceful, and Sarah returned to her happy, playful self. John and Grace were finally able to relax, believing the ordeal was over. However, a week later, strange things began to happen again. The family heard faint whispers at night, and Sarah started saying she felt someone touch her shoulder, even though no one was near her. One evening, as Grace was tucking Sarah into bed, she noticed the charm Mama Rebecca had placed above the bed was missing. She searched everywhere but couldn't find it. When she told John, his face paled. "Do you think it didn't work?" Grace asked hesitantly. "I don't know," John replied, his voice heavy with worry. "But we need more help. I think we should speak to our pastor." John and Grace attended a small church not far from their home. Their pastor, Pastor David, was a kind and understanding man who had helped many families in their community through difficult times. The next morning, John and Grace went to the church to speak with him. After they explained everything, Pastor David listened intently, nodding occasionally. "This is serious," Pastor David said, his tone calm but firm. "Mama Rebecca's ritual weakened the spirit, but sometimes these entities are stubborn. They can resist being banished completely. I believe this spirit has found another way to linger in your home." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "What can we do? It's affecting Sarah again." Pastor David stood and placed a comforting hand on Grace's shoulder. "Don't worry. We will handle this together. But I must warn you, this will require faith and commitment. Spirits like this thrive on fear and doubt. You and your family must stand strong." Pastor David visited the house that evening with 2 elders from the church. They brought with them a Bible, anointing oil, and small wooden crosses. Sarah was a bit nervous but calmed down when Pastor David smiled at her and said, "You're very brave, Sarah. We're here to make sure your home is safe again." The first thing Pastor David did was gather everyone in the living room for prayer. He explained that this was not just a physical battle but a spiritual one. "We must claim this house as a place of peace and light," he said. He anointed every door and window in the house with oil, praying as he moved from room to room. When he entered Sarah's room, he paused. "This is where it started, isn't it?" Pastor David asked. Grace nodded. "Yes." Sarah always pointed to that corner. She shuddered at the memory. Pastor David stood in the corner and began praying loudly. Suddenly, the air in the room felt heavy, and Sarah clung to her mother. The elders joined Pastor David, their voices steady and strong as they prayed. As they continued praying, Pastor David suddenly stopped. He turned to John and Grace. "There's something here, something tied to your family's past. Have you noticed any recurring patterns or strange events in your family's history?" John and Grace exchanged puzzled looks. "Not that we can think of," John said. Pastor David frowned. "Sometimes, spirits like this are connected to unresolved issues, grudges, or hidden secrets. It's possible that something from the past has given this spirit permission to linger." Pastor David's words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. John and Grace looked at each other, their faces etched with concern. Grace hesitated, then spoke. "There's something, but I'm not sure if it's connected." John turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Grace shifted uneasily. "Years ago, before we got married, my grandmother told me about a family disagreement. It was with distant relatives over land. She said it ended badly, but I didn't ask for details. I thought it was just one of those old stories that didn't matter anymore. Pastor David's expression became serious. These unresolved disputes, especially those involving anger, betrayal, or greed, can leave spiritual scars. If the people involved didn't reconcile, it's possible the bitterness created an opening for something dark to enter your family's life. John rubbed his temples, trying to piece everything together. But how would that connect to the carving? My uncle brought it into the house, and he wasn't part of Grace's family. Pastor David nodded thoughtfully. Evil spirits can move through objects, people, or unresolved curses. The carving might have been the catalyst, but the deeper issue is the family history. Pastor David suggested that the family needed to address this unresolved history as part of the spiritual cleansing. You'll need to seek forgiveness and reconciliation on behalf of your family. This isn't just about Sarah's safety. It's about breaking any ties that have allowed this spirit to stay. But how do we do that? Grace asked. First, we'll pray as a family. Then, we'll contact anyone who might have been involved in the dispute or knows more about it. Even if they've passed on, we can pray for peace over their souls, Pastor David explained. John sighed. It sounds like a lot, but we'll do whatever it takes for Sarah. The next morning, Grace called her mother to ask about the land dispute. At first, her mother was reluctant to speak about it. That was so long ago, she said. Why are you digging it up now? Mama, it's important, Grace insisted. It might be connected to what's happening with Sarah. Her mother finally opened up. She explained that the dispute had been over a piece of farmland in the village. Grace's grandmother had claimed the land, but another family accused her of stealing it. The argument escalated, and though no physical fight occurred, the other family allegedly placed a curse on Grace's grandmother's descendants, swearing they would never live in peace. Your grandmother didn't believe in those things, her mother said. She ignored it and moved on. Grace relayed this information to Pastor David, who nodded. This is likely the root of the problem. The spirit in your home might have been drawn by the lingering effects of that curse. That evening, Pastor David returned with the elders to perform a final cleansing. This time, he led the family in a powerful prayer of reconciliation. We ask for forgiveness for any wrongs committed by our ancestors, he prayed. We release any anger, bitterness, or curses spoken over this family, and we claim peace and protection in Jesus' name. As they prayed, Grace felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered her own prayers for peace. John held Sarah tightly, silently praying for his daughter's safety. When the prayers ended, Pastor David anointed the house again and declared it free from any lingering spirits. This house is now a place of light and peace, he said firmly. But remember, you must continue to pray and keep your home spiritually protected. That night, Sarah slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Grace and John finally felt a sense of relief. For weeks after the final cleansing, the house was peaceful. Sarah no longer woke up screaming or talked about the man in the corner. Her laughter returned, filling the home with joy that John and Grace had missed so dearly. They were finally able to sleep through the night without fear. Grace kept up the habit of praying with Sarah every evening before bed. John made sure to inspect every item that entered their home, ensuring nothing with a questionable past would be brought in again. The family grew closer, united by the ordeal they had overcome together. One day, as Sarah played in the living room, she looked up at her parents and said, "Mummy, Daddy, the man is gone now. He's not coming back." Grace froze for a moment, but then smiled. She hugged her daughter tightly and whispered, "That's right, my darling. He's gone for good." And he was. The spirit that had once tormented their family was now a distant memory, a reminder of the importance of addressing the past and protecting the present. From that day on, John and Grace never ignored their child's fears again. They learned that even the smallest voices in a family often hold the greatest truths. The story of John, Grace, and Sarah teaches us the importance of listening to children and taking their fears seriously. Nightmares and strange behaviors should not be ignored. They could be signs of something deeper. Whether it's a spiritual matter, an unresolved family issue, or something else, seeking help and working together as a family is key to finding peace and safety. Always pay attention to the smallest voices in your home. They might hold the greatest truths. We want to hear from you. What did you learn from this story? Share your thoughts, reflections, and lessons in the comment section below. Your perspective might inspire someone else. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Share this story with friends and family. Comment your thoughts and lessons learned. We appreciate your support, and we can't wait to see you in the next story. Stay safe, stay kind, and always listen to the voices that matter. Thank you.